Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this live show. It is being streamed in my Facebook page and my YouTube channel. Today we are going to talk about the world's largest refugee camp in Cox's Bazar. And to talk about that today, we have the representative of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in Bangladesh. And he is none other than Mr. Johannes Klaauw. Mr. Johannes, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. And how are you?
Good, I'm good. Thanks for asking. And it's my honor to have you here today. So thank you for giving us time.
Well, thank you for the opportunity because it's important that the Rohingya refugees here in Bangladesh gets the attention that they deserve because they need support, they need help. They're refugees and not here by their own choice. So I'm very grateful that you give us a bit of time to discuss the situation and what we can actually do for them.
No, thank you for coming here today. So, shall we start with the questions?
Please, yes.
So, how is your experience running the largest refugee camp in the world? And how challenging is it, and what are the major challenges?
That is indeed a key question. As you mentioned yourself, this is in Bangladesh, in Cox's Bazar, the largest refugee camp in the world. In fact, it is a megapolis. It's close to 1 million people. And so they live in very densely circumstances, 1 million people on a very short piece of land. So to manage this and to create conditions for the refugees to have a safe life in what we call dignity is not easy. Also, the Bangladesh invited the Rohingyas here when they knocked on its door, particularly in 2017. In a week's time, over 700,000 Rohingya came from neighboring Myanmar, from neighboring Rakhine State, and they needed the support. So we could not leave them at the border, but it is not easy for Bangladesh to still have them on its territory. We all thought by now they would have been able to return, but no way, unfortunately. So coming to your question, we need to feed the people, the Rohingya, we need to give them good health care, education, protection, that they feel safe, that they can also, amongst the most vulnerable, the children, the elderly people, the disabled people, the single women, that they get the support they need, that they live in an environment which is clean, which is green, which is healthy. All these services need to be provided. And that is challenging for 1 million people. That means also, if you ask me about my experience, personal experience, to manage this, you do this not alone, of course. You do this with numerous organizations who help you. We are together. We are over 136 non-governmental organizations and UN agencies who together, according to their specific expertise and experience, look after the health, the education, the social protection, the water and sanitation needs of the refugees. So personally, to manage this, to coordinate this, is also a challenge. You need a lot of people. My own organization, I have 400 UNHCR staffers under my management, and you can imagine how much budget and costs are involved. So you need to manage all this. So that is challenging, but it's also very interesting because this is a very large camp, so you need to look after everything. So the variety of interventions I mentioned already, you become, I wouldn't say an expert, but you deal with education, you deal with health, you deal with water, sanitation, hygiene. You also deal with, we will come back to this, I assume, later in the discussion, environmental issues and climate change consequences, disasters, monsoons and cyclones. So the variety of work is also very motivating, and it's for me still a learning experience. Even with my 30 years of experience, this is the most intense and diverse operation dealing with refugees I have ever had in my long career.
Thank you for your answer. So basically, the challenges you're saying is, the basic needs that all the children, all the people need, but they don't have.
Yes, the issue is that the refugees came here with nothing. They came after serious violence, and we can
Mm-hmm.
discuss that a bit later in the discussion, with nothing, only the clothes. So they needed to rebuild their lives. They needed shelter, they needed clothing, they needed support in the children going back to school. Many people needed mental and physical health support. Uh, so they need everything, and everything had to be brought in. So Bangladesh and its people, they were the first responders, and then we came also as international community to help. But everything had to be rebuilt. But the Bangladesh authorities would like to see the Rohingya go back home, and we all agree. And they were the first as refugees. They want to go back home, but they cannot let go back home. So they need to also somehow be allowed to rebuild a bit their life themselves, so that they're not totally dependent on humanitarian aid. But that is a challenge.
Right. Thank you for your answer. I am sure that many Rohingyas have shared with you the terrifying experiences that they have come across. So, what did they tell you? And what kind of persecution, large scale violence, and human rights violations caused them to migrate?
Yeah, this is of course a question about which I can talk at length, but I don't like doing it because it's so horrific. It's so terrible what they went through. You know, their houses were burned. Their own fathers and mothers and children were killed before their eyes. They lost their loved ones. The women suffered serious rape and sexual violence, mutilated bodies. I mean, terrible. It's all being documented, and it's important that it's documented because, in the end, if we will find a way for the Rohingya to get their rights restored and to get them returning home, justice must be done. Not only the truth must be revealed, but justice must be done so that when they go back, that they will not be subject to, again, to this terrible treatment. So it is important to talk about all this. It's very important to document this because this is what we call the accountability which the rulers at the time who committed this and who are still in power needs to face, so that, as I said, justice is being done for reparation, compensation to the people who suffered, but also to prevent this from ever happening again. So yes, this is a piece of work of the UN and us which must be done, but it's also, you know, for the Rohingya who suffered this and who are now in Bangladesh to overcome this trauma, which is not only physical but also mental. You need to invest a lot in this. Um, and I can tell you, they are now 5 years in Bangladesh since they came in August 2017. In fact, next week is the fifth anniversary. And the colleagues I meet who were here in 2017 and 2018, and now they come back, they say it is a change in what you feel in the camps, because in 2017 and 18 people were completely numb, they were traumatized, they were still completely fragile, and they were suffering a lot. But now you come back and they have picked up their life again. You feel again more resilience, as we call it, more strength, and they're
Mhm.
more entrepreneurial, and they want to make out something out of their life. So they're regaining their mental and their physical strength, and that's very important. But this is not an easy thing because they need to be accompanied in that journey to deal with this severe trauma which they suffered, and none of us would ever like to be subjected to.
Thank you for your answer, right? So, what essential services, including health and education, is UNHCR providing to the refugees, especially to the women, children, and the people with disabilities?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Before will explain a bit this, first of all, I think the basic service we provide is to give the refugees back an identity, a registration, and a card. Many Rohingya never ever had any document in their life because in Myanmar, they're not considered as citizens of Myanmar. They are being stripped of their nationality, of their citizenship. They are so-called stateless. In fact, they are double discriminated. they're not only refugees out of their country, they're also stateless. So the fact that upon arrival in Bangladesh, we could register them as refugees and give them a card, the number of Rohingya in the camps who show with pride this card is numerous. And they say, finally, I have an identity. I am somebody. I exist. And that the psychological effect of that, the beneficial effect is key. So that's the basis. And that card is also essential in order to access services. With that card, you can go to the clinic to get medical support. You go into school registered as a student. With that card, you can go to get other services like in the water and the sanitation and the hygiene sector, in the protection sector, social protection. So that is essential. Now, coming to these services, they're numerous. I mean, look at your own life, what you need. You need to go to school. If you're sick, you need the doctor or the nurse. You need clean water. You need to have your personal for your personal hygiene things. You need to feel safe, not to be in a violent. So you need the police around you to help to control the streets and the living work, and particularly where you live so closely upon each others. If you give yourself just 5 minutes what you need in your life, it's a lot, and that's all we provide. But at the same time, you also want to contribute yourself. I mean, you have your energy, you have your talents, you want to make a living out of yourself. So we also help the refugees through education, through what we call developing of your talents and your skills, and to develop your own activities so that you can gain a bit your living. This is also what we want to provide, because nothing is better for a refugee to no longer be dependent on aid and handouts, but also to earn your own living. And in that sense, we allow the refugees, together with the authorities, to work as so-called volunteers with stipends, so that they teach in the schools, so that they are nurses, if not doctors, in the health centers, so that they work to provide water and sanitation, but also clean the place. All the keeping the waste management under control, keeping the place clean, etc., etc. So all this we provide. And for the people with disabilities, it's very good you mentioned it, because about these 1 million, we have at least 4% which have a kind of disability, not being able to walk well or to have mental disability. And for instance, we also, if you go to school, you should not have access to the school. It's not on the first floor, it's in the ground floor. But to move there, you need transport. The same if you need to reach the health center. So we have all these type of services, and we need to very much focus on the disabled people, because they are often the ones who are forgotten, and they're also the ones who are the most vulnerable, and they need support. But we need to provide this access to the services for them, and
Great.
specialized education programs, etc.
Yes, thank you. We know that Rohingya refugees are highly exposed to weather related hazards such as cyclones, flooding, and landslides in the existing highly congested camps in Kutupalong along its vicinity. So, what sort of measures are taken to tackle this?
Yeah, as you say, the refugees live in Cox's Bazar, in the southernmost part of Bangladesh, bordering Myanmar. And as you mentioned, this camp is called Kutupalong and also Nyapara. And this is a region which is very prone to landslides and cyclones and monsoon rains. And not just the refugees are the victims of that every year, but the Bangladeshi host community living there for years, for decades, for generations. So we invest a lot in preparing the population every time again. The monsoon season is coming. There will be cyclones, there will be torrential rains. So try to prevent your dwellings, your accommodation, your shelters from being wiped away, blown away, by strengthening them, but also the way we design the camp situation in a way that if it suffers from these natural hazards, that the damage is being controlled. So we have all kinds of programs, not just for the Rohingya, but for all the people living there. It doesn't matter whether you're a Bangladeshi or Rohingya, you're all in the same vulnerable situation. At the same time, to prepare the people, both Rohingya and the Bangladeshi, for the upcoming cyclones and cyclones, we have a lot of volunteers trained in the refugee community and in the host community to be able to create awareness amongst the population for the risks they can, and also the landslides and the floodings, and what to do when it comes, etc. So there's a lot of preventive measures. But then part of that is also a bit wider, we need this area to be fully grown with trees and with the roots in the soil, so that the soil is more compact and not easy to be swept away. So we have invested a lot in deforestation, if not the reforestation, because when the refugees came, they started to cut all the trees because they needed firewood for the cooking in the household. And we have now introduced all liquid petrol gas. So they have their bottle, the cylinder of gas, so that they can cook with gas, so they no longer need to cut the wood. So the place is now again transformed from what used to be a lunar landscape, is nothing, again to a very green and lush area. And it's not only good for the environment, but it's also good for preventing that there are landslides and the erosion, because that should be prevented as a measure to not have too much damage when the storms and the cyclones come. So, and then finally, we have a number of youth in the refugee camps and in the community who are climate activists, who have learned what it means, the changes caused by warming up of the earth and the climate changes. And they do a lot of awareness and spreading the word in the community, how to do better with the energy, with the way they live. For instance, we don't to start a campaign also against the plastic in the camp, to do away with it, and not just once to clean it, but to prevent that it's not there again, etc., etc. So we do a lot with the youth to make them aware of the effects of climate change, because they are the future and they have to live in this habitat, in this earth, much longer. So all these activities we do. And then, of course, once there is a lot of damage, we have trained people so that they can immediately rebuild the house. Of course, one element here is that the government of Bangladesh does not allow us to build stronger shelters than what is allowed, bamboo with tarpaulin, because it needs to remain temporary, because in principle the refugees should go home as soon as they can. But that being said, you can do a lot even with materials, bamboo and tarpaulin, to make it stronger and better protected against the cyclones and the landslides and the floodings.
Right. Thank you for your answer. Moving on to our next question. Do you think Bhasan Char is a good alternative? Because we have seen in the news media that facilities like protection, food, water, shelter, and health are better there. So, what do you think about this?
Yeah, here you have a very important question. So let me just take you back in the time. Rohingya came to, we talked about Cox's Bazar, but as we discussed, it's very densely populated. And the government of Bangladesh said we need to decongest that place. So let's spread the refugees a bit further down, further away. So under the leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister, one of the chars was designed, Bhasan Char, as a location to which we could relocate, hopefully, ultimately, 100,000 of this 1 million refugees. So this is ongoing, but living on a char is not easy. It's quite isolated. So yes, the refugees are now there, and yes, we are supporting the Bangladeshi NGOs already active on this island for some time in providing the same services to the Rohingya on Bhasan Char as we do in the camps in Cox's Bazar. But so that means teaching in the learning centers, health, nutrition, water, sanitation, hygiene services, social protection services for the most vulnerable children and victims of gender-based violence, because that you also have, unfortunately, on Bhasan Char, you have already 30,000 people living there. But coming back to your question, is it a good alternative? I wouldn't say it's an alternative to the camps. It is a second location, but the challenge is more that we need to de-isolate that place, because my Bangladeshi friends tell me if you live on a char, you live in connectivity with the mainland, with neighboring chars, because you need to live on that char out of these contacts, commercial contacts, uh, productivity. You need to get your products and sell your products on the mainland. A number of facilities, specialist facilities, health facilities cannot be expected on the chart. So if you have an accident, you need to be with the water ambulance to the mainland, to the hospital there. You have many people who breed their cattle, and from char to char, they fish together. So we are in the process of suggesting to the government of Bangladesh to look at Bangsa Char for the long term, to keep it as a successful project by investing in what we call this connectivity between the chars and the mainland. And also, most importantly, to let the refugees on that char invest in their own entrepreneurial skills, set up their own what we call livelihood projects, starting their own fishing, agriculture, gardening business, but also their commercial business. They have their shops and so on. Because, as I said earlier, you cannot live on a char totally dependent on aid. That's not sustainable in the long term. You need to open it up. You need to develop it together with the other neighboring chars. So that is the main challenge for us and the government. This is a project which the government designed, and the government should lead it. And we, as a humanitarian community, complement it, we supplement, we come with our expertise, which is maybe not available with some of the Bangladeshi NGOs. We work in good harmony, but it is also, the government wants to allow us to do a number of innovative projects which we would like to do, but we should not forget that Bhasan Char ultimately will be a place for maximum 10% of all the refugees, and 90% plus continue to live in Cox's Bazar in the camps, and we need to ensure that they get similar level and quality of services as on Bhasan Char. We should not have a disparity, an unbalance in the level of service. That's not good. They need the same level of assistance in both locations. And most
Great.
importantly, to go to Bhasan Char as a Rohingya, you need to do this based on the proper information, what you can expect on Bhasan Char and how the living conditions are. And you need to feel free to sign up to relocate, because we do not want people to be coerced or forced to Bhasan Char. And the government is well aware of that. They're very conscious of the fact that any relocations to Bhasan Char also in the future need to be so-called voluntary, based on a free and informed choice by the refugees. And secondly, that once you are in Bhasan Char, that you also be able to once in a while visit the rest of your family who stayed back in Cox's Bazar, or that you go there if you need medical support, which is not available in Bhasan Char. But also, if you start your business on Bhasan Char, that you be able to have the links with the mainland to sell and purchase, etc. So we need to open it up, but we need to make it a place which for the refugees feels like connected to other areas, because isolation as such is not good for your mental and your physical being.
Great. So thank you for your answer. I have gone through the funding update published in July 2022, where I found that UNHCR has a $200 million funding gap, which is actually 70% of the total requirement for this year. So, how will you make up the gap? And is this the situation every year? I am asking because I have also seen a 50% funding gap in the last financial update of 2021.
Yeah, thank you also for that question, because it might sound a very technical question, but money talks. And it's very important that what we do and what we have to do for the refugees is well funded. Without funding from the international community, we cannot do our job. Now, I'm happy to tell you that compared to the funding figures you quoted for last July, the ones of this month are a little bit better. Every month we get some money, but as you also indicate, we never get enough money. Every beginning of the year we put there what we would need ideally, and we never get there. But this is unfortunately the same situation for many, if not all, the refugee operations in the world at large. Everywhere we never have enough money. So we always need to be very conscious what we do with the money we get, how we prioritize to at least address the needs of the most vulnerable. The vulnerable women, the vulnerable children, the vulnerable elderly people, the people with illnesses, they at least needs to be getting the support they need. But then also the children that they go to school. Education is so important. It's the future, it's the future generation. And so we try with the money we have to do the maximum possible. Now, we also, knowing that our money is never enough, we really want to tap on the energy and the capacities and resources refugees themselves have. They can do a lot themselves. And we saw it in the COVID times when we had to reduce our presence in the camp because, we should not spread the COVID, so to speak. And where we also could not leave the refugees just without any support. So we trained the refugees to themselves become the teachers in this, home teaching because the schools were closed, as you know, but at least to keep some activity going on. Health services needed to continue. So we trained refugees as nurses, as doctors, as health workers, community health workers. The garbage needs to be collected. The camp life went on, there was the monsoon coming, they needed to prevent it, etc., as I just explained. So we invested a lot in the refugees themselves, and this is now that the restrictive measures have, thank God, been lifted after the pandemic has subsided today. We keep this resource we have amongst the refugees, so we keep them active and working and contributing, because with the money we get, we can never do whatever we need to do. We also try to get others involved in funding us, the private sector. There are many donors, individuals like you and me, who want to give money. And it can be a scholarship for the child to go to school. It can be for a health project. It can just be for the large pots. We also have companies, with foundations and philanthropists who want to put their money somewhere for the good cause. I can tell you, investing your donations in Rohingyas response in Bangladesh is very much, if I may say so, value for your money. It goes directly to the people, and you will see how happy and healthy you make the people with this. So we try to diversify, as we call it, our funding base, that we are not only dependent on funding from governments abroad, but also from the private sector. And then, you have very much money with the so-called multilateral international financial institutions, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank. And they have lots of money, and they can spend, they start spending this not only for Bangladeshi community, but also for Rohingya. And that's not necessarily money which has to go through us, but they can do a lot in infrastructure and building things, and the roads and the water systems and health. And that is very important that we get that money too, so that with the relatively little money we have, we can do our part of what we have to do.
Great. Thank you for your answer. We all want that all refugees should have a return to their home country in a safe, dignified, voluntary, and sustainable manner. But in the case of the Rohingyas, is that ever going to happen? And do you really think that Myanmar will ever take back them? If yes, after how long? Is there any real repatriation process in place?
Fatia, I wish I could give you the answer, and I just don't know. Nobody knows. But let me say this. First of all, the Rohingya already came to Bangladesh after various waves of violence in 1978, in 1992, in 2012, and then, of course, the big influx in 2017. And those Rohingya who fled in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they managed to get back. We managed to help them to get back. So return to Rakhine State, to Myanmar, is certainly not excluded. It has happened in the past. So why can't it happen again in the future? It should happen. We should keep our hopes up. Everything we do in the camps in Bangladesh is in preparing for return. And the refugees themselves want to return. I have worked for over 30 years in refugee operations. I have never ever worked with refugees who were so keen to go back to their homeland. The Rohingya nearly all want to go back to Myanmar. Those who can't, who don't want, they cannot. They have lost everything, and there's a minority. But over 70% generally all want to go home today rather than tomorrow. So it's not for lack of interest and willingness to go back, and we all want this to happen. But for this to happen, changes have to be made in Myanmar. Now, on the one hand, we are, as UNHCR, active in Rakhine State in Myanmar. We've always been there working. It's difficult, it's a restricted environment, but we continue working there, and not only giving humanitarian aid to the people who were left in Rakhine State, not only Rohingya, also the ethnic Rakhines, but also to invest in reconstruction in all these places which were burnt down in 2017, so that we make it ready for return, that the schools back, the hospitals back, etc. But that's not enough. For return to happen, the Rohingya needs to have back their safety and their human rights. And as I said earlier, they have been stripped of their citizenship. They have declared non-citizens as if they're not belonging. So if they would go back without solving that rights issue and that citizenship issue, at least the rights issue, they would not be settling, because they would not have access to the property and the houses, because they've been told you cannot prove that you were the owner at the time. So they need to have these documents. They need to have this guarantee that they can reacquire their properties, their land, start working on the lands, move to the lands, etc., do their business, their agriculture. So all that, these are political questions which need to be solved. And that is, humanitarian crises don't have humanitarian solutions. They have only political solutions. So that political agenda needs to be sorted out. And that's a matter for the international community to put pressure on the Tatmadaw, the army in charge in Myanmar, to agree that when Rohingya come back, that their rights are being restored, that they can again have their freedom of movement, that documentation. Remember, I talked about the importance of a document you have in the camps, but you have to have it also back in home in Rakhine State. So all this still needs to happen. And that is a matter of consistent diplomatic engagement and pressure on the Myanmar authorities in charge, that they allow the Rohingya to be citizens and equal members of society with their full rights restored.
Right, so thank you for your answer. We all know that Myanmar has not ratified the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment yet. So, do you think this is a major obstacle for repatriation?
Let me say it this way. The fact that the country does not ratify international instruments in human rights is, of course, indicative that they don't think this is important, and often this is then also that they don't respect these rights. So you mentioned a very important international instrument for the prevention and addressing torture and inhuman degradement, because there is torture in Myanmar. So the fact that they have not ratified an instrument is in by itself not an obstacle to return, because to make return happen, to make people feel safe and secure back home, is in the end a matter of how they live and how their rights in reality are being respected. And it would be good if your country has ratified international instruments such as this convention, because they then need to put it in practice. They are obliged to do that. So by ratifying this, they give a commitment they will do it. Without the ratification of such an instrument, you can't be always sure. But it's in and by itself not an obstacle. Not every state has always recognized every instrument. Bangladesh, for instance, itself has ratified nearly all international human rights instruments, but it has not ratified, for instance, the core international refugee protection instrument, the 1951 convention, because it does not recognize Rohingya legally as refugees. It doesn't, but at the same time, you see that they host Rohingya, they protect them, they assist them, they allow us to do it. So in practice, they do this, which is very good. Now, coming back to your question, what is more important is indeed that for Rohingya to return to Myanmar, is that their rights in reality are being protected, of which I just spoke in the previous answer to the previous question. So I don't want to repeat now what I'm saying here. But the major obstacle for repatriation is not necessarily that Myanmar has signed only few instruments, The major obstacles on the ground, in reality, that
Mhm.
the Rohingya are not accepted as part of Myanmar society, don't have their rights in reality, and that needs to be restored. And frankly speaking, if there's a political will, it's easy to do, but the political will needs to be there. And we have some good examples in Rakhine State where the ethnic Rakhine and the Rohingya start living better together with each other. Because if you always hear as an ethnic Rakhine that the Rohingya are nobody, have no rights, you start believing it. And that, of course, is wrong. So we need to also invest in Rohingya are people like you and me. They have the fundamental human rights. They are as equal and as anybody else, and they need to deserve to enjoy these rights.
Right. Thank you for your answer. Recently, on the 22nd of July 2022, the International Court of Justice, or ICJ, has rejected Myanmar's preliminary objections to the case brought by Gambia under the International Genocide Convention. And by rejecting these preliminary objections, the ICJ is allowing the case to proceed on the merits to examine Gambia's genocide allegations against Myanmar. My question is, since Rohingyas are under the care of UNHCR Bangladesh, is your organization helping in this trial by providing mental support to the Rohingyas and any such factual data if needed?
Yeah, first of all, you mentioned what we discussed earlier, the very much important work what the International Court of Justice does, but also the International Criminal Courts, and there's also another investigative mechanism to document the atrocities of the past, because and then to make this a court case so that in the end the truth is established and justice can be done. And that is that the rulers in Myanmar who are responsible for what they did to the Rohingya are brought to justice and being told this needs not only never happen again, but you need to give compensation. This is what we call accountability for what you did in abuses needs to be addressed and needs to be repaired. So this is very important work. And as you mentioned, these are international criminal and international justice courts, which is under the UN. So that's a part of the UN which is key. Now, how we as humanitarians work or do not work with them, um, this is a different part, and we want to keep that firewall because it's very sensitive work. You know, of course, that in order to build the case before the court, the investigators and the prosecutors and the lawyers, they need the documentation. So they come to Bangladesh, they come to the camps, as you indicate, and they interview people to collect what happened to them in order to build the case before the court. This is very sensitive work. And the refugees they interview, they have to do it in a totally confidential way, that nobody sees these refugees being in, because it's exposed them, it's to be able to provide this testimony is you need some courage, because if this is known and in the camps there are forces who are against the Rohingya, and we should not expose them. So we, being there in the camps, we make it possible for these investigators to do their work, but we are not associated with them. We keep them totally separated. We do our and we make sure that this very delicate, very sensitive work is done unnoticed. That is what I can say. And that if people are interviewed, the trauma comes back again, which is very likely. It's often for the people themselves very difficult and to go through that memory again. That we make sure that there is aftercare. And as this was your question, there is mental and other, but we do it in a way again that if people need that, it's not known or shown why they need it. It's not linked that they were witness giving this testimony, because again, it needs to be very much firewalled, and that's a very different work.
Right, thank you for your answer. This is my last question to you, but a very important one. UNHCR Bangladesh has a wonderful batch of national ambassadors and youth advocates. And it's really an honor for them and an opportunity for the refugees in Bangladesh to get messages and encouragement from them. And I'm also on the way to becoming the youth ambassador of UNA Climate and Ocean based in the UK and an Arctic Angel of Global Choices based in the USA. So I want to know from you that how great is the involvement of the national ambassadors and youth advocates of UNHCR in Bangladesh, and how can I contribute?
Yeah, as you said, the role of the youth is very important as advocates for the future of your planet and your societies. So it's always extremely encouraging when youth really embrace a cause to work for, be it in climate issues, be it in social issues, educational issues. And if you can also do something for refugees, that will be fantastic. And as a Bangladeshi, since Bangladesh hosts all these Rohingya, if you can uh, do something for them and be an advocate, that would be great. We have goodwill ambassadors of all backgrounds. We have one Bangladeshi, Bhasan Char, who is a singer songwriter who is very popular, and he works as goodwill ambassador for the UNHCR in Bangladesh for the Rohingya. We have also international goodwill ambassadors from the sports and from the and entertainment sector, etc., from all kinds of social causes. Um, and yeah, this is all very, very important work because raising awareness and putting the plight of refugees before the international community and call on appealing for their support, etc., is key. And young ambassadors who have the future and the energy and have so much influence over their peers um, are key for that work too. So I can only encourage uh, young people to contribute there's many things you can do for refugees in the world at large, including for the refugees in Bangladesh and for the Rohingya here. So I can only encourage you to do that. And I'm very happy. This is also what the discussion we have today helps to promote the real image of the Rohingya as refugees who need support, who needs protection, but who are also essential young people. Half of the people in the camps of the Rohingya are young, who also want to make something out of their life and should be given a chance. And you as youth, you can do this peer support and interact with them, and in that sense, be the best advocate for them. So
Right.
thank you a lot.
No, it's my honor to have you here today. So thank you, Mr. Johannes. That was all for the questions. And thank you for coming actually because the Rohingya is actually a very important topic. So thank you for giving us time among your busy schedule.
You're most welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes,
Thank
thank you.
you.
So I'll
Bye.
see you later. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay, dear viewers, I hope you all enjoyed this live show. Please stay tuned for the next one. Thank you and assalamu alaikum.